Hi, everyone, and welcome to the I Am Landscape Growth Podcast, where entrepreneurs help entrepreneurs grow faster, better, and stronger in the green industry. From leadership to sales to recruiting and operational excellence, we cover the topics holding entrepreneurs back and share how to get past those bottlenecks with the best in the industry. I'm your host, Rob Murray, co founder and CEO of Intrigue, a digital marketing company focused on helping landscape companies grow. So sit back and enjoy the show. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the I Am Landscape Growth Podcast. I have a very special guest on the show today. I'm stoked to introduce Andrew Gross from the Mariani Premier Group. Andrew, thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, you're quite welcome, Rob.
Um, Trying to think about his extensive background and his career of how I'm going to introduce Andrew today, and I'm going to say it. I mean, I'm not trying to blow smoke, but kind of a master of marketing, a craftsman, if you will. History from Unilever to Serta, and now part of one of the largest residential construction and landscaping businesses in the U.S. I mean, you've had quite the path. So I'm pumped for the audience to hear your perspective on today's episode, but maybe you can give a bit more depth and a bit of a Coles notes of how you ended up coming from a place like Unilever to the Mariani Premier Group.
Sure, Rob. And I'm really excited to be here today, not only to talk to you, but a chance to speak to everybody in the audience for this podcast. Um, I guess, if you talk about my career, I always knew I wanted to be in business. When I was in college, I actually had a summer internship with Pepsi and I sort of got the brand management bug and knew I wanted to get into things related to brands. I knew I was going to have to get an MBA. So I went and worked in retail for a couple of years after school, got my MBA at Michigan where I met my wife. And then we got a job in consumer products, originally with a company called Lane Curtis that marketed hair care products like Suave and Salon Selectus and Finesse, some brands that aren't around anymore. And we got bought by Unilever and rose up the ranks there. And eventually I was running brand development for the hair care category. And that was bringing things like Dove into the hair category. And I really love the opportunity to learn about consumers, build brands, build the programs around that, lead teams. Um, and but I came to two realizations. One, I didn't want to work for a $50 billion five-dimensionally matrix company. I'd done a lot of work on new products and initiatives and really liked entrepreneurial teams. And at the time, we were living in the Chicago area and we didn't want to move. And working for a big multinational, we didn't want to move. So you were going to have to move. So I ended up jumping ship and doing something different. I wanted to do something smaller, more entrepreneurial. And I was recruited to come to Serta, uh, the mattress company, when they were first bought by private equity investors. They were the number three brand in the market, and I helped them become the number one brand. We built the brand, built a famous campaign, the Counting Sheep campaign, launched big innovations, grew the business, doubled the profit, and then we went through some different ownership changes. We merged with another company called a mattress company called Simmons. I was running the Serta brand, and I sort of realized at some point it sort of became like Unilever all over again. It was a big company,
Yeah.
and we didn't want to. We were going to move the business to Atlanta. We didn't want to move to Atlanta, so I wanted to do something different again. And so I left there and did some consulting and advising work, working with startups and other businesses. And I was introduced to Frank Mariani a few years back when he had just started building what became the Mariani Premier Group and talking about some of the challenges he was going to have. And as we brought these companies together, wanted them to operate as different brands underneath kind of an overall kind of company umbrella. Some of the challenges you saw and how they would continue to build their businesses. And it sort of dovetailed with some of the things I had done in the past. Working with multiple brands or businesses, working with different business partners, for instance, at Serta. And I really liked the business. And when I was a kid, um, my dad was very into gardening. We had our own vegetable garden and perennial garden and a rose garden, amongst other things. So I'd always had a little bit of a green thumb. And I never worked in a service business that seemed attractive. And so uh, Frank and team weren't ready to hire someone like me. They were still building the business. And then about a year later, I was still doing consulting. They called me and said, "Hey, can you come talk to us? This thing is getting bigger now. We really need the help from someone like you." And that's how I sort of made the pivot from being in the world of consumer products to being in the world of landscaping.
Yeah,
I've been
amazing.
now with Marianne about 18 months, and it's been great.
Very cool. So, I mean, I'm pretty sure we could do episodes on each stage
Yeah,
of that, but for the sake of today's episode, because it is about the primary growth constraints
yeah,
holding entrepreneurs back in the green
right,
industry, with, and most people coming on the show are entrepreneurs in their own right. They've
right.
built their own landscaping business. A lot of times we have folks coming in from associations or business coaches that coach landscape entrepreneurs. You, if none, have had, in 35 episodes, the background you've had. So I'm really interested to hear your take on what you see as the primary growth constraint holding entrepreneurs back in the green industry, for lots of reasons. One, because of the background, but two, because of the position you're in currently. Like, you're pretty deep next to, you know, dozens of entrepreneurs in the green space. So what do you see as the primary growth constraint?
Well, before I answer what the constraint is, I would talk about like the strengths first. I haven't come across an industry with as many passionate, resourceful, entrepreneurial, um, energetic, dedicated people as I've seen in the landscape
Fun,
space.
open.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Openness, the sharing. I think the collegiality, while still being, competitors, um, is incredibly strong. And I see people, and the focus on doing great work, doing right by clients, doing right by their associates, because this is a service business. So I've been in a lot of product businesses. So I've seen a lot of entrepreneurship, but right, not in a world where, ultimately you got to deliver that through people, not
Right.
just through physical goods.
Not just, yeah, what you develop.
And so those are all tremendous strengths. And I think also the commitment to lifelong learning, whether it's learning from others, from different peer groups, from being part of associations, the active role the NALP has, I think in elevating the industry. I've been involved in other industry trade groups that have been more focused on sort of representing the industry to other parties, but as opposed to elevating the industry and all the people in the industry, and also thinking about the future of the industry and how you bring people into the industry
Yeah, that's cool.
is fantastic as well. So those are all the strengths. I think the opportunity side happens, and it happens in any small business, right? Because you start a business, you're wearing all the hats, and then over time you have to figure out, well, here's the things I don't do well, and I need to start delegating them by hiring other people. And then the hard part comes, the things that I do well that I actually do need to delegate so I can spend the time on thinking about the future growth of the business. And I think when you start talking about growth in a business, anybody that's an entrepreneur is in a sales and marketing role, right? Because they had to build their business, whether it was
Yeah, they had to sell.
right, they had to sell. Um, and at some point you have to come to the realization, either I'm really good at this, but I need someone else to do it because I need to focus on other things to grow the business, might be growing the infrastructure and the staffing of the business, entering new markets, new services, or I'm not as good as I need to be at this, and I need to get a specialist. And so that's kind of, I think, a sort of a pivot or fulcrum point that I see with a lot of these companies. We see that with some of the companies that join our group, a Mariani Premier Group, very successful, and they sort of hit a point where, you know what, I built a great business, but I know I could use some help in some areas to continue to grow, and being part of our group certainly benefits them in that way. So all that leads to kind of like your question about, so what's the thing that's holding them back? I look at it like at a high level, and it's about having a plan. And it's one thing to say, okay, I have a business plan of certain ambitions. I want to get from 1 million to 3 million to 5 million to 10 million. Um, but it's breaking it down, particularly when you think about marketing and sales, into a detailed plan. It says, how am I going to grow? Where is that business going to come from in terms of clients, in terms of services, in terms of things I might be adding to the business? And then what activities am I going to engage in that are going to get me to that growth? And that will wrap into things about who you are, what's your brand, what's your message, what channels you want to deliver that to, where you get your leads from, what you're trying to do with those leads, right? At the end of the day, it's kind of like if you ever saw the movie The Martian, right?
Yeah,
At
yeah.
many stages in
Matt
the
Damon,
movie,
right?
right? So
Yeah. Matt Damon.
Matt Damon,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Stranded on Mars. And at
Yeah.
many stages, like he faces like a series of obstacles to survive until, like, they actually find out he's still there and they can come and rescue him. But he constantly kind of says, well, I just got to put my head down and do the math. And that's often what you have to do in business is you got to build the plan. You got to say, if I want to get, say, from 5 million to 10 million, where's that revenue going to come from? How much is going to come from new clients? How much is going to come from increasing revenue from existing clients? How good do I need to be at retaining my clients? And what do I need to do that, right? And if it's going to come from new clients, where are those new clients going to come from? Like geographically, what type of clients? And then where the lead sources come from? Am I driving it from referrals, whether that's from other clients or professional sources? Am I building relationships in the community, et cetera? And then also, what's my marketing plan going to accomplish? And you kind of need to do that planning, right? So that then you can activate your organization around what needs to get done in order to drive that growth. And if you're working with a marketing partner like Intrigue, so they know what they need to do to fit that plan. Because I think it's very easy sometimes companies will say, well, I'm not growing enough. I just need to hire a new agency. That's only one part of your plan, right? You know, your new agency can't solve whether your people are effective at selling, whether they know how to do business development, whether you have the right services, whether you
Whether
price
they
them
show up on
right,
time and do a good job.
whether you do the work and all that. That's just one part of it. And so what I see often in companies is they may have a budget on paper and they might say, well, next year we're going to grow 10% and we're going to somehow get there, right?
Right.
Versus having a plan that breaks that down into your strategy and the actions that you need to take that enables the people in your company to know what they need to do and accomplish, and your partners what they need to do for you.
I love it. And it's obviously something you've thought about
Yeah.
because you articulated it very well. And if anybody's listening to this, you should probably just rewind the last 90 seconds to 120 seconds and listen to it again. Because what I think you did really effectively is lay out a bunch of the critical variables of what that plan needs to look like. And even when you said it, my first question I wrote down is, what does that plan look like? And
Right.
then you just essentially answered the question. But maybe we can just unpack it a little bit by
Yeah.
little bit, because there was a couple of things in there that I thought were, well, they're all useful, but
Right.
they kind of go in different paths. One is
Mhm.
something like, what's going to be, how much of my new revenue is going to come from new clients and how much is going to come from current business and growing current business or keeping current business.
Right.
Then there was this other piece around, okay, well, if it's coming from new business, then where am I going to get that new business from? What activities am I going to engage in? And if it's coming from current business, well, what new services am I going to bring to my current customers, or how am I going to increase revenue for my current customer
Right.
base? So then if you were to start that planning process for somebody,
Yeah.
so first question, so you have an entrepreneur listening to this being like,
Yeah.
oh, plans, I don't know. How much time does it take someone to build a plan like that? And I know it's going to vary from person to
Yeah.
person, but like if you consider someone wants to build a plan, what would you recommend in terms of the amount of time that you need to put towards putting something like this together?
You know what? I think a lot of this, if you can kind of get the right people in a room, you can do in a half a day's work session.
Perfect.
If
So
you know
let's,
your business well. And I should step back. I talked about building the plan. Sort of underneath the plan is you need to know who you are and what you stand for. So there's like two core principles that I always subscribe to. One is the brand. A lot of people talk about what's your brand? Is your logo? Is it a tagline? Whatever. The brand is the experience. It's what your client experiences. Every touch point you have. So you need to
yeah,
think about what your brand is and what makes it different, right? And there's various frameworks for that. I like to use a framework, which is basically you should have a mantra or a key statement, a point of difference. You should know then underneath that kind of what are the points of parity, the things that you need to deliver to be competitive, and then what are the points of difference, the things that make you different. Maybe it's a particular service offering or approach that you go after.
sure.
And you should define kind of what you think your values are. So that's like the brand side of it. And then you have to think about marketing as a process. Marketing is a process of getting and keeping a customer. So that will get to your question, right? What I just said is if it's the process of getting and keeping a customer, then I have to figure out, all right, what customers and how many customers I need to get, right? what's my retention? I'm going to keep them. And then, the other part of keeping a customer is how do I increase my revenue with them, sell more to them? And I don't mean just take price increases, but actually
Bring
expand
more value.
the services and value that I deliver to that customer.
So what
So
do you say to I mean, we'll come back to a couple of pieces
yeah,
here, but what do you say to somebody who's running, let's say, a $7 million design build,
yeah,
don't do maintenance? I'm like, design build maintenance? They're like, no, no, we don't do maintenance. Like, so you just build these beautiful landscapes and then you give it away to somebody else to maintain.
right.
And they essentially say yes. But what do you say to them? Like, how can you help them see maybe things a little differently? I think it's bananas, but I don't necessarily want to tell them that. Maybe it's not
Yeah.
always bananas, but it seems crazy to always have to have new clients coming through the door every year.
Well, I think there's a few thoughts about that, and that's something that we certainly focus on in Mariani Premier Group, right? We look at our business. We have uh, strong design build components in our business, but also maintenance is very important to our business, and it's important because it's recurring revenue
Yeah,
and it's building
predictable.
relationships with clients over time, and those relationships can lead to other relationships. So, if I looked at a business that was design build only, I would probably say that probably um, a lot of their marketing has been more to kind of professional sources than directly to consumers because they're probably looking at, if they do, for instance, bid build, they would be talking to landscape architects. If they're doing just design build, they're probably talking to builders,
Right.
architects, interior designers, et cetera, right? To get into those jobs. So that is a relationship component. But then yes, but they're delivering a great service to these clients. Wouldn't you want to take advantage of that relationship by building a recurring revenue component to that? So to me, that's an opportunity for growth. If I was thinking about the strategy there, is how do I convert my existing construction clients to maintenance clients, right?
Hmm.
And then over time, now that I have a maintenance business, how do I leverage the strength that I built in that maintenance business, assuming that I do great work, right? To secure more maintenance only clients. And that could be through client referrals, right? Could be building, strong relationships or density in certain communities. And none of this, by the way, I've said actually starts to get into what the marketing plan can be, right? This is just
Right.
about trying to figure out organically how am I going to grow the business from a sales standpoint. So that's where back to that exercise, right? If you do the work and understand kind of, what the current structure of your business is, what the opportunities in the market are, and then think about, all right, if I'm going to want to grow, marketing is a process of getting in and keeping a customer, which means in the end of the day, what I'm trying to do is drive behavior, trying to get people to do something, right?
Right. High
That might
value
be
activities.
right. It might be to sign an initial construction contract, to convert that contract to a maintenance contract, to get additional maintenance people, to sell more enhancements to those. Those are all behaviors, right? And so you start to define your plan. Well, what needs to happen there? And then how am I going to make it happen? What do I have to communicate to whom in what context in order to be able to do that? So it's sort of just working out that process. That's what you're trying to do in a planning meeting. I always subscribe to uh, I'm going to paraphrase this because I don't have it right in front of me, but Eisenhower famously said in World War II that something to the effect that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. And the point was, you create a plan, and as soon as the ink is dry from your printer, it's already obsolete. Like something has changed in the market. But the process, like planning, that process is super important because now you have a framework that, yeah, when new information comes in, maybe something changes in the market, maybe changes internally,
But then
maybe
you adjust a plan
you
by
can adjust it.
5%
Right,
instead of having to create one to 100%.
right, right. Now you have a thought process and an approach that your team is aligned around. So some people will say, back to your original question about, well, how much time will this take? Is that worth the time? It is worth the time because you have to think about it's not just about to produce a piece of paper. It's really about engaging in that dialogue about how we're going to grow the business, right? And continually building on that dialogue.
I totally agree. And one of the things we found, so we subscribed to a couple of different frameworks. We
Yeah,
did like the 4 disciplines of execution many years ago with Covey, and then we tried out the entrepreneurial operating system, and then scaling up. And scaling up's got this one-page strategic plan.
right.
EOS has got this vision traction organizer. anyway, they're kind of cool tools because they provide a framework with empty boxes, and then you and your team go in and fill the boxes. And what I found was that filling an empty box was actually quite time consuming and difficult. And there was a lot of debate and, there was rigor. But once it was filled out once, going back and refining it was actually quite simple.
Yep.
So just curious, is there a framework that you would suggest someone to check out as a starting point so they don't build it from scratch? Or how would you say someone kind of gets started doing something like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have looked at both EOS and scaling up. I've read both books, and it's, by the way, it's interesting to like delve a little bit into the behind the scenes war between particularly
Burns understudy?
Vern Harnish and what he sees as his understudy, Gino Wickman. But that's probably a whole nother podcast.
Well,
And
the irony too is that Vern started EO, and EOS is more popular inside EO than scaling up, which is just funny.
yeah.
Anyway,
So sorry, we're gonna get your audience a little bit off track there. But if you want to get sidetracked, subscribe to Vern Harnish's newsletter. It's actually a lot of interesting stuff in there, but also subtle digs at EOS.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so I have tended to use like the framework I just told you about, like existing customer, new customers, existing customers, retention, etc. The way I look at it is I try to build a plan on a page. And so imagine a piece of paper, and the top it says, okay, what's the vision for my business? What's my mission or purpose? What's my goal for this year, right? So that usually is a financial goal in terms of sales and profit. And then I recommend like no more than like 4 key initiatives. And I'm going to tell you 3 of them generically, right? Which I just said well, actually, I'll go through all 4, right? So if you're in a design, build, and maintenance business, right? So those 4 generic initiatives are going to be, all right, for design build, I want to get more projects or jobs, right? So how am I going to get those, right? And then the next part will be the actions for that. For maintenance, I'm trying to increase my maintenance clients, right? The number of clients I have under contracted maintenance. I then want to have an initiative about how do I increase revenue per existing client. And then the last sort of generic strategy is how am I going to drive increased retention? And retention is super important here. If you haven't
It's
done
the
the
most
math,
important.
right? If you haven't done the math, like do the math on paper. I'll give you a simple example. Everybody will cite different close rates, and they'll say their close rates are like astronomical.
80.
Yeah, 80%, whatever. I'm just going to use a rule of thumb and say your close rate's probably 33%. And the reason it's probably 33% is most humans, like, especially for any big project, they want to get 3 bids. And so they're going to choose one of those. So say it's 33%. And say you have 100 clients and you want to grow 10%. So you need 110 clients. Okay. So and so you'd say, oh, I just need 10 new clients. So if I need 10 new clients and my close rate is 33%, then I need 30 new qualified leads. Yeah, but now think about retention. So if my retention is only 80%, I actually have to start from a hole, right? That I lose 20 clients. So actually, if I want to grow 10%, right? I actually have to add 30 new clients in total, not 10 new clients, 30 new clients. And if my close rate is 33%, right? Then that's actually 90
Or
new,
100.
right? Yeah, sorry, 100, right? Yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
30,
qualified leads.
yeah, 100 qualified leads versus before, I said a much smaller number. And then you think about, well, how much does it cost for me to get a lead? Like your costs go up hugely. And
Well,
people
and
look
what's
back on it.
fascinating in your example is if you have 200 customers and you do the same math,
Yeah.
it just starts to exponentially become a bigger gap.
Yes.
With an 80% retention rate, now you're down 40. And if you want to get to 210, you need 50. And on that 33%, you need 150 leads. Like, so that retention rate being 90+%, oof, if you want to grow a business, that is so huge.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. If you build a one-page plan, it says, hey, here's my vision, my mission, my financial goals, and here's 4 key strategic pillars in our business. Again, if I'm a DB and maintenance business, I want to add more design construction clients. I want to add more maintenance clients. I want to increase the revenue with existing clients, and I want to retain, X% of my clients. And you can define those with numerical goals, right? We just talked
Hmm.
about retention. I think in this business, your goal should be, 90% plus
Hmm.
retention. Revenue expansion per client, you can set a goal there saying, you know what, out beyond price increases, I want to increase the revenue 5% or whatever. Your new growth is going to be based on what you think your growth role for the growth objectives for the company, both on the design, build, and the maintenance side. And then from there, you can say, all right, what are my actions that I'm going to do with that, right? Design building, one of my clients, it might be, I'm going to build relationships with these professional groups or whatever in terms of sourcing the business. It might be certain advertising. Maintenance, I'm going to, increase my referrals, increase my conversion of DB to maintenance, right? You can set specific actions, right? And around that. And then you can then say, how am I going to measure it? So how am I going to know that I'm progressing towards that goal? And you
Yeah.
can get that all with the right size font and those those that they were watching online. I mean, you can get this on one page, and then what you do is, and that's sort of the plan on page I like to build. And then I have like 2 other pages with it, so it's not entirely a plan on page. The second page is okay. Now I took those pillars. What do I want to do? What are those key things I'm going to do? Right? How much am I going to spend against each of those? So you can figure out your budget, right? What's the measure? How am I going to know if I'm successful? And who in my company is going to be doing this, right? To make sure, you might say it's all in one person, but sometimes it's different people. So that's sort of like your detailed, uh, action plan and budget. So you can figure out your budget. Because what I see often in businesses, and what I'm outlining here when I talk about not having a plan, I see businesses that sometimes they have a budget, but they actually haven't figured out their activities in the plan. They're just like, you know what, we're going to spend $50,000 in marketing next year.
Oh yeah, that's so common. And even
Right.
if they have that, sometimes that's not even.
Right. I see people that have an activity plan. Here's all the things we're going to do. We're going to place these print ads, and we're going to do this one event, and we're going to spend a little money updating our website, and we're going to print some new brochures and all that. And they have a list of activities, and here's how much they cost. But it's not a plan because they're not tied to a business result. So why are you printing those brochures? What goal is that? Are you trying to achieve with that, right?
How are you
Why
going to
are you
measure it?
placing that print ad? Right. So it's not tied to, so it's not a plan. It's just an activity plan. It's not a business
Strategic
or
plan.
marketing plan, right?
Yeah.
So that's the second page. And then the third page is simply it's a calendar, right? What are these key things going to happen across the year? And the beautiful thing about landscaping, and it obviously depends on where your business is in different parts of the country.
Yeah.
That's a natural cadence, right? Follows the seasons, right? The
Yeah. The demand cycles are predictable.
they're predictable. The tulips are going to come out of the ground at the same time of the year. And maybe it might be a couple of weeks earlier if it's a warmer spring, right? And so the drive periods, particularly on the maintenance part of the business, the drive periods, what you need to be selling when, whether it's selling new existing clients or new services to existing clients. You sort of know the same thing in terms of design build when you need to cultivate those big projects, right? So you can lay out these activities against the plan. You should be able to go into the season knowing, again, plan on paper, once the ink is dry, yes, things will change, but you should already know exactly when I'm going to plan to do things. Um, I'll give you a sort of semi-related example. I was talking to someone, candidate for a role that we haven't hired, that we didn't hire this candidate, that was working on she had a role in pool care business, pool chemicals. And her job was they had an activity plan for pool chemicals that was granular to the day for the season, because obviously it's a seasonal business. But they
Yeah.
knew exactly from a marketing standpoint what messages they were going to deliver when, even down to what emails, what social posts, everything was calendar out going into the season.
Yeah.
Now, That, now they left space, like if there's, major storms or other things that they would need to adjust, but they knew what they were going to do um, as they went in the season. So that's the third part, is having that calendar, and the calendar should follow, you know, the the natural calendar of your business. It often leads your salespeople, right? If you're
Well,
going,
and a lot of times people try to like, they're, what are we
yeah,
going to do this year? What are we
yeah,
going to do this year? It's the same. It doesn't have to be reinventing the wheel every year. Like
no,
a lot of times folks forget that consumers make this purchase once as much as we do it all day, every day. A lot of people don't see the stuff that you had in market last year. You don't have to be verbatim the exact same, but you can leverage the same approach to content and what you're doing from a
yeah.
calendar perspective. I think it's really important.
Absolutely, absolutely. We tend to, as internal people in business, and particularly marketers, we get bored with our stuff much sooner than our
The
consumer
consumer,
clients, because they're not paying attention, right?
right?
And we're paying attention to it every day. And so you're absolutely right. The other thing is, like, don't reinvent the wheel. Yes, you always want to continue to improve and you should experiment. But when things are working, don't say, well, we should just change it because we need to change it,
Yeah.
because your your audience is not in, especially in business like this, we're not, this is not a fashion business, right? So in that sense, yes, trends change, but there's a lot you can learn from the previous year, what worked, and apply that going forward.
Well, and like,
Yeah,
a lot of people also forget 3% of a market's ready to buy.
right.
And so if that, so 97% of the people that you're putting stuff out to probably
Okay.
don't know that you said anything. So yeah, anyway, that's, we don't
No,
need to.
and you need to be, but you need to be available. That's why, for instance, that's why we work with Intrigue, because we know, for instance, then when people are in the market and they express that demand, for instance, through search, we need to be ready to communicate to them. Um,
Oh, yeah.
and I stress also to our companies, like, you think about social media, a lot of people that think about social media here and now, how did my last post perform? What kind of reach and engagement it gave. Um, Especially for younger people, uh, social media, Instagram and TikTok are search engines.
Yeah.
And so you also have to think about the content you're creating, that people might pull it up months later, because that's when they're actually interested in it, right? It's not like someone is following every project that you post in social media that day, but then they come visit in your company, and then they might go to your Instagram and say, I'd like to see their work.
And then they get to know somebody who's doing how-to stuff. They build a
Right.
relationship with the group, and
Yeah.
then all of a sudden they inquire 8 months later.
Right. So you always have to think about, back to your point about, yeah, we get bored with that stuff, but we're always like continually building and adding to our story for the future, for when that prospective client wants to come and discover us.
Yeah, that's cool. One of the things you said earlier was, if you get the right people in the room, this should be a half day's workshop.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about what the right people would look like? Again, in the shoes of the
Yeah.
entrepreneur, trying to figure out how to make all this happen. What kind of people should I have around me?
It's a great question. I think you certainly want people in a sales client facing role that understand what's going on in the marketplace and what clients are saying and what they're responding to. Um, you want, if you've got a marketing, obviously you've got a marketing team member, you want that person in that meeting. Um, if you have somebody, whether it's in your company that sort of can be objective and sort of call BS on stuff, or you need to bring someone in from the outside
Mm.
to be part of that meeting that you trust, I would do that.
Well, and,
And
and that's a separate point
yeah,
altogether. Having a mentor or a trusted advisor as an entrepreneur that's outside your business, keeping you honest to your
yes,
BS and pushing you forward with accountability, whatever, is just a good idea.
yeah,
Sorry, I didn't mean to
that's,
interrupt, but that's
no,
that's
that's
just a side
especially
note.
a good idea, and especially in these kind of planning meetings, because it's very easy for us to sort of get wrapped up in our own world.
Hmm.
And so you need a little bit of objectivity there. And then it's also good to have somebody that knows the numbers, okay? Because we're going to start trying to put some numbers together to this stuff. And listen, a lot of our entrepreneurs, people did not get into the landscaping business because they like spreadsheets,
Right.
most
Yeah.
cases, right?
Typically, yeah.
A lot of the people, I encounter, even when you talk about sales, they got in this business because they like their horticulture and plants. They like creating landscapes. So you have to recognize what you're good at and you're passionate at, and then make sure you're kind of building a table for this conversation that can kind of bring different skills to the table. But they all have to be open-minded and willing to contribute. right?
Yeah.
So that's the way that I, try to encourage people when they think about kind of planning meetings.
Yeah,
Um,
and then the last thing I want to add to that planning meeting piece for the audience, and you can speak to the statement in a minute here, but I find a lot of times when people start these off, they schedule a planning meeting, everybody comes to the meeting, they may or may not have an agenda, and they start to have the meeting.
yeah,
It's from my experience working with it ourselves and with others, giving people prep work and a very clear agenda of what's going to happen and when that prep work needs to be part of the meeting makes it so much better.
yes,
And if it's your marketing and salesperson, where did all our new business come from in the last 12 months?
yeah,
What didn't we win and what was the common reason why? Marketing person, what was our best lead source? What was our worst one? Where was our best cost per lead? Finance person, where were our margins on the projects? Which ones were good? Which
yeah.
ones are bad? Whatever it might be. But getting people engaged in work prior to coming to a session like that, super important.
Yeah, pre-work is important. So like what we, and you raised some things. So we haven't talked a lot about, my role at Mariani Premier Group, right? We're now a group of 20 of the finest residential landscaping companies across America and continuing to grow. And these are all fantastic, successful businesses, all bring great things to our group and also have things that they can learn from each other and learn from the group. And my role is to help them elevate how they're going to perform in the market so they can continue to beat the industry in terms of growth. So when we go and work with companies, and I work with particularly their marketing teams on their plans, this is exactly what we do. We try to say, all right, let's build a plan against this framework. We need to look at some of the data and the inputs to see what's working, what's not working. We need to understand the strengths and weaknesses and what drives your business. But doing all that kind of pre-work before we start to build a plan is super important. It gets people thinking and also make sure that we stay grounded in the data. And that's something that we're still working on with some of our companies. We're putting a lot of effort into implementing better systems and processes. We've been putting, as you know from your work with us, a lot of work on implementing a sales CRM system, so we can
So the
kind of
information's accessible.
right, accessible, and we can consistently track sales, sales lead sources and results in a common way so that we can share that learning across companies. But that data and making sure that the folks that are coming to your planning process come armed with having done homework is super critical. But I will also stress you don't want to overdo the homework. There are people who have like already arrived at the solution before you get to the to building the plan, right?
That's cool.
Because you got to let the sparks fly.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
All right, so let's do that quickly then.
Yeah.
Can you just give what an overview of Mariani Premier Group? And when I was talking, so one of the things Frank's always been talking about is raising the standard of professionalism in the
Yeah.
industry. Met with him down in Mexico, and within the first 2.5 minutes of speaking, there's raising the standard of professionalism in the industry. It's just like this mantra. And then working with you folks and all the different companies and going through the onboarding process, it was pretty common thread. Everybody was looking to increase the standard of professionalism in the industry through the actions of their own company. So what is the Mariani Premier Group all about? Can you just give us a quick overview of what this whole initiative is and
Yeah.
what's going on?
Well, first of all, I mean, I think Frank will certainly speak to it much better, and he's been out there on several podcasts recently talking about his inspiration and genesis of the group, right? And I think originally he brought the group together, I think for a couple of reasons. One, he personally was looking for a succession path as he thought about, the development of Marianne Landscape, then the largest residential landscaping company in the country. Um, he was thinking about other successful entrepreneurs and owners like him that had built their businesses and kind of how they can continue to ensure that those businesses thrive and continue to grow beyond their time with those companies. And then so I'll make this the third thing. And then Frank has been a major advocate, as you talked about, raising the professional standards in the industry. How can he continue to develop and transform landscaping into an admired and respected profession on par with other professional groups? And that's where I think, his role, for instance, with NALP, when NALP became the National Association of Landscape Professionals, a lot was about sort of elevating the profile of the industry. And there are super fantastic, talented people across all the disciplines in this industry, whether it's in design, construction, installation, maintenance, that are true professionals at what they do.
Oh yeah.
Um, and so I think those were all the themes that are part of the thesis of saying, well, no one had ever created a national platform in residential. Residential is very fragmented market by market. Certainly, there was a lot of more consolidation in commercial than residential. And the approach was not to take the approach that has been done with some of the companies in commercial, where essentially it's sort of a consolidation or roll up of local brands into one national company, which sort of becomes a little bit impersonal and commoditized. This was, how do we maintain the spirit of the local brand and the relationships they've built, but make them part of something bigger where they can share the professionalism and expertise that we can build across the companies. And that's
Yeah.
sort of what we've been building with Mariani Premier Group. Our vision is to be the world's premier outdoor living company. Our mission is really to kind of transform landscaping through the combination of creativity, um, technology and service. And how we kind of go to market is as a house of brands. Each of our companies operates as their own brand in their market, but they're
Yeah.
supported by the common infrastructure of Mariani Premier Group, whether that's in technology or human resources or finance or national procurement programs or in sales development, or in this case, in terms of marketing, how to elevate how they go to market to reach both their existing clients and new clients. And we've been
Yeah.
fortunate to work with Rob, you and your team with several companies in doing that. So that's sort of the story. And I think by doing that, we're contributing to elevating the professionalism in the industry by sort of
No
creating
question.
an entity that really hadn't existed before.
A
That's,
100%. And I think one of the things that's neat, there's lots of what's
yeah.
going on because, having engaged you guys for the better part of 8 months, 10 months, nothing's deviated from that. That's been the initial part of our conversations all the way through to what we've experienced. And there's just no question it's happening. But I think one of the things you've got going is that you guys are going to start setting massive precedences about how you can leverage this type of stuff to help support the growth of these companies that really are professionals in the industry
Mhm.
and really have amazing businesses. Okay, so as we wrap up, a couple of resources. What would you say in terms of speakers, authors, just points of inspiration, maybe one or two resources that you think people should check out?
That's a great question. I mean, well, we talked about, for small entrepreneurial businesses, we talked about EOS and scaling up. I think they're both great in different ways, and I think they provide uh, different frameworks there. Um, you know, the approach that I sort of outlined to planning sort of ties in a little bit to what those companies do. Um, and then, it's interesting because I'm not going to talk specific about planning, but in terms of like, a lot of companies struggle with like figuring out their brand story. So I am a fan of the story branding framework and Donald Miller's books. I think
Yeah,
that's helpful for a lot of kind of companies like this. It sort of takes thinks about their brand along the lines of the hero's journey. And since we're in kind of in a company client relationship, remember the client is the hero, we're just the guide. I think that framework is super helpful to companies in this space. Um, and so to me, that is, an inspiring thing. And I think if you want to really get to the source material there, then you can go back to Joseph Campbell and Hero of a Thousand Faces and things like that. Um, so those are, those have been some of the things that have been most inspirational to me. Um, there's certainly, different blogs and newsletters that you can follow in the space of marketing. You can sort of get overwhelmed with that a little bit and like, kind of get into sort of the trick or trend of the day.
right.
I'm a big believer you got to get the fundamentals right, and
And they're
those will be
timeless.
enduring, right? Those are timeless. I have a former colleague of mine, a gentleman named Mitch Duckler, he's written a couple of books. One is sort of like how to build brands, and the other one right now is sort of on sort of how to approach marketing in the kind of the current era. And I had a recent conversation with them about, like a lot of this still comes down to like enduring principles that we learned like decades ago. It's just applying them in new medium, right? Whether that be Instagram, TikTok, or what might be coming next. So for a lot of the companies, I think it's be careful about the bright shiny object and make sure you really understand the fundamentals of who you are and how you're going to attack your marketplace, and then you can figure out the appropriate media to do that.
I love it. I mean, and a lot of things in all the stuff you've mentioned, whether it's
Right?
Gino Wickman's, EOS, Vern's scaling up,
Yeah.
Donna Miller's story brand, Joseph Campbell, and I bet you Mitch Luckler talks about this stuff, is just don't forget it's about the customer.
Yeah.
You know, it's not about you. It's about the customer. I find that when people just use that as a North Star, a lot more things fall into place properly. You're the best. Thank you so much for doing this.
Well, Rob, thanks so much. Thanks so much for the time. Really enjoyed
Cheers.
working with you. And folks can find me. You can find me on LinkedIn. Reach out to me if you want to learn more.
Andrew Gross. Thanks, man.
Thank you.